Welcome back to the Sunny Talk Spurs YouTube channel, and it's my first collaboration since I've returned from the Euros back on that Tottenham Hotspur grind. And today we're going to be talking about Tottenham and how they're sort of delving into their youth policy a bit more when it comes to the transfer market and also their academy. And who better? She's already done a video on it herself than Alice. How are you doing today, Alice?
I'm doing good, thanks. It's great to be back on the channel. And yeah, I think Tottenham have got some really exciting young players coming through, and they probably need to add a few more experienced players into the side, but their youth project's definitely really exciting.
And this is the thing where we're talking about youth players is Manchester United gave, I think, the most minutes to youth players last season. I think I saw about 4,000 minutes. Don't quote me on that, but it's in and around that number. And two of the lowest teams were Tottenham and Arsenal. North London, not the best place if you want to be a youngster getting into the Premier League. But Tottenham do have a lot of players and youngsters coming through, as I say, the academy. And our transfer policy, I think our average age now is around the 25 years mark. So, Alice, my first question is, what are you making of this sort of shift in strategy? You know, not ultimately going for these star names, but bringing in players that have got potential and Ange Postecoglou can eventually grow.
Yeah, I think it's quite a smart strategy, as long as you just don't do it to the level Chelsea do it, where they just buy everyone. But I think, Burwell and Archie Gray are very sort of smart strategy. I obviously wasn't aware of the Yang guy you signed, but that could be quite a smart one, sort of those low risk deals. I think the strategy right now is Tottenham aren't really a team that's going to buy £100 million player, and when they have spent big, it's not always worked out. And with Ange and being a manager that develops young players, there's potential there for Tottenham to find some of the best young talents that are technically gifted and have the profiles of what Ange would want in a player and mould them into something special. I think there needs to be a balance of youth, experienced players that are entering their prime, obviously to bring the best out of them. And I think if I was Tottenham, I'd be looking at an Ivan Toney or looking at an Eze, or if he could stay fit, looking at a Pedro Neto, because I do think you need some experience in attack. You potentially may look for an extra name in midfield and someone that can give you left back, left centre back cover. But I think for me, when I last did a video of you on my channel, it must have been in May, we sort of said 4 realistic signings that Tottenham should go for, and I actually put for my DM Archie Gray. And I don't know if you remember that, but I always said, I just think because he can play right back, because he can play DM, I think because he's done it in Leeds and the Championship's demand league, I think he's a special one. And I think when you're buying the likes of Burwell and Archie Gray, it's clever. If you just went out and at Chelsea and bought every young midfielder, I'd be a bit like, you've got Archie Gray and Burwell. But I think with Archie Gray, Burwell, and I'd say Mikey Moore, who I've obviously not watched as much of, they're three players that definitely have top level potential.
And I do remember you saying that about Archie Gray. I know you were sort of saying that you wanted United to maybe look into him, but because of the Leeds connections, it was a bit of an iffy subject. So, yeah, I think you were spot on back then. And I'll move on to that question, actually. I'm going to skip ahead to the signing of Archie Gray. Obviously signed for £40 million, but it's more like 30 because we gave them Joe Rodon in a sort of swap deal. Do you see him as a player for the here and now? You know, he sort of played a bit of centre-back weirdly for Spurs. He's played in the midfield in our most recent game. Or do you still see him as that sort of future player in the midfield for Spurs?
I think out of all your youngsters, Archie Gray has the biggest chance of establishing himself as a regular this season. I think obviously he's only 18. He turned 18 halfway through last season. People have got to forget that that's so young. He's going to have good games, he's going to have bad games. But we've seen with Kobbie Mainoo come through at Man United last year at 18 and then established himself as a regular. And because Man United had midfield issues, it helped. I think because Basumas can be quite inconsistent, because you have injury issues, I think he could establish himself as a regular, whether he plays a bit at right back, depending on what happens with maybe Spence, whether he even fills in at centre back, but you've got Dragusin and Romero and Van de Ven. But I do think that out of all your young players, and I think while Burwell's probably been the most impressive in pre-season and Moore's been brilliant, and you've probably got a little bit of lack of depth on the wing, I think in terms of just physicality, I think Archie Gray having a full season in Championship for Leeds, he's probably most ready to step up to that challenge out of youth players that I can think of.
It's like you've almost seen some of my questions as well, because I was going to say to you, who do you think has stood the most out for Spurs this season, in pre-season, I should say? And you said there, Lucas Bergvall. So I'm going to combine these two questions in one. Why do you think Lucas Bergvall, do you think he can be such an important player for Spurs this season? A lot of people expected him to maybe go back out on loan at the age of 18, but he's come in. I've seen some people compare him to Modric, which might be a bit over the top. do you sort of see him as being a fundamental player? You know, Spurs were being touted signing the likes of a Conor Gallagher, but is he actually the answer for Spurs' like 8 role that, you know, can maybe be there and replace Maddison when he eventually moves on as well? And also, do you like the idea that Spurs seem to get these youngsters in and then loan them back straight to their clubs? I'm thinking that we did it with Sarr, Adogi. We've done it with our new Korean winger, Hyuk. I can't pronounce his name, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it. But yeah, I mean, going back to Bergvall, how do you sort of see his role developing then at Spurs?
I think Bergvall's a bit more difficult to predict because I almost think in terms of excitement to watch, he's probably the most exciting. But I think in terms of being ready, Archie Gray has definitely probably got that more experience, particularly in English football. I think Bergvall's a difficult one to predict as well because he plays higher up. And if Maddison is in form, he's great. You know, Kulu could sometimes play higher up in the midfield as well. I know he's not done that a lot recently. There's Sarr. If you do bring in Eze or potentially someone else that you've been linked to as more of an 8, it will be more difficult for him. The Celso, I think, if he stays fit, can also add stuff. So there is that element of competition for him a bit more than Gray because Gray can play the defensive midfield position. And it just depends how he does because obviously in pre-season he's looked good, but you've not played, like, you've got Bayern Munich, I think, next. So it'll be interesting to see how he does against the bigger teams and in the Premier League and the intensity. I think he's one of those where you might keep him, but if he doesn't play a lot, you might loan him out in January. But I think like a loan for Bergvall isn't a bad idea. Like, I think he's really exciting, a really talented player. But unless you know he's going to get minutes, maybe a loan could be good. But I mean, with the inconsistency in Spurs' midfield, he could definitely get in because I think like you've got a really good player in Sarr, you've got a good player in Bentancur, and you've got a good player in Maddison, but they've been inconsistent last season, and maybe that was just because Spurs were inconsistent in general. So it's interesting to see how he adapts to the Premier League. But if he came in and was great and then kept his place, that wouldn't surprise me. But I think he's more likely to maybe get a loan out of him and Gray. I think Gray's more likely to start, in my opinion.
I think when it comes to Ange Postecoglou's team selection as well, he knows his best defence now. And when it comes to attack, obviously, we're looking to probably bolster in that area. It's been the midfield, like last season and going into this season, where, you know, it could be any of the 3 players. You know, obviously, Basuma started well. Bentancur came in, then got injured again. So it's really hard to predict what that first midfield is going to be on the Monday night football when we play Leicester City. Luckily, we don't play any of the big hitters very early on, but it'll be good to see. And it's good to have those options of like a young blend and sort of older, more mature players in those positions. And now moving on to our academy players who have featured quite a lot in pre-season in a multitude of positions. You've had the likes of Mikey Moore, Jamie Donnelly, Will Lange. Do you sort of see these players being the answer for Spurs, or do they sort of need to still look at the likes of, you know, Ivan Toney's, Dominic Solanke being linked as well, Pedro Neto, as you say, as well?
I think like there's potential. Like obviously I wasn't too familiar with Donnelly and Lange. I've heard a lot about Moore because he's considered like a generational talent for his age, whereas I've not heard as much about the others. And I think, you know, there's definitely potential in those young players. But I mean, we've seen it time and time before at Man United. We've got this great kid in the under-18s, under-21s, has a good pre-season, but starts playing for United and isn't just quite the level for Premier League regulars. But they're still good players. You know, we've had people like Angel Gomez in the past, James Garner, who I think should have probably been given more of a chance. You know, Telen Mengi, all playing for Premier League clubs. Andres Pereira, they have good pre-seasons. They look good. Chong's been was one that was hyped. And I think one thing you've got to remember with youth is a lot of the time you must think because you support the club and you're excited for them, they're better than they are and they're great and all of that. But I think Donnelly, Lancashire, Hall, even when he played, they've all had impressive pre-seasons. But I think Tottenham, because the attack on paper is probably where I would say your weakest area is right now. Like I think Son, you've obviously got a top class player. Kulu's looking quite good in the more central role, but you just don't know how he's going to adapt to the Premier League and how consistent that will be. Like I do think he's a good player on paper, but I think as an Ange Postecoglou winger, if he plays on the wing, he's not really an Ange style winger, so he probably would be better central in Ange's system. Brennan Johnson, I think, is very good and impactful off the bench, but again, inconsistencies. Timo Werner is good for bench depth, but he's not someone you'd want to start in your best front line. And I look at Tottenham and I think they need someone that's ready now. They've gone for Project Youth in the midfield, but they've already got a decent amount of options in the midfield. Sarr, Bentancur, Maddison, you know, Basuma, even Lo Celso. I'm assuming Skip and Højbjerg probably go. that you've got good options in midfield, so you can afford Gray and Bergvall, whereas other than Son, I think there's question marks over what is your strongest front three. Richarlison has good moments, bad moments. Like if I'm Tottenham, I go out there and I go, Ivan Toney, Pedro Neto, get the experience in, and then you've got Brennan and you've got Werner and you've got Moore on the bench. And you've got Richarlison. He's been linked away actually to make an impact, because I think you've got a lot of great young players, but it's realistically only one or two ever are brilliant. It's weird. Like Man United, we had 3 stars in our academy when we won the under-18s Youth Cup: Garnacho, Maino, Dangor. I was like, they are the 3 standout players, and I said this about 2.5 years ago. And we're like, maybe we can bring 3 through. The Garnacho and Maino have come through, but Gore and the other ones, as good as they were, they just haven't come through yet. But I mean, from what you've seen in pre-season, the youth has been good, but it's just such a big step up in the Premier League that I think if I was going to say one, it would be more, but you just never know, really. It's hard to know until the season starts.
And that's the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this, because Man United have been so good at knowing how to blend these players in. Like looking at Spurs Academy, as I say, Lange, we poached him for Sheffield United, I believe, and people comparing him to Harry Kane because the way he strikes the ball. But has he got a future in the club? A lot of people would rather see Lange given a chance than maybe us bid 65 plus million for a Solanke. You've also got Judson Bell, who we poached from Chelsea, and he's looked really good. He's put up some good numbers, but can he make the step up? It's hard to know. And then recently we let go of a youth prospect called Yaya Santiago, who everyone thought was going to be, we were touting him like we have touted some of these players, but he's moved on to a lower division Spanish side. And some people were saying, is he the one that got away? It's always the way when you talk about youth talent. You never know. Have you done a Chelsea like when they got rid of Salah, or have you just, got rid of a player who's never going to actually make anything of their career? But obviously another transfer we made was the Korean wing I've been touting a lot about. We've loaned him back to Gangwon FC. And again, one for the future. He's not really going to, start. He probably will get loaned out again in January, I could imagine as well. What do you make of this signing? Because you've spoke a lot about him on your own channel as well.
Yeah, like when you signed him, I'd never really heard of him. So I went away and I did some research, and I was reading upon what people actually watched the K-League were saying about him, and they were saying this is like the most exciting talent in the league. He's very good. He seemed to cause Emerson Royale a lot of problems. He's a tricky winger. If you used data MP and you compare his style, he came most similar to Anthony Gordon, which is obviously, in terms of what he could be, it's obviously a good benchmark there, because Anthony Gordon's one of the best wingers in the Premier League at the moment. So I think, it's one for the future. Son's getting old, so, you're looking to potentially look ahead for the future. I think, again, Tottenham probably may want to go for that experienced winger, because while Brennan Johnson, I think, could step up, and there's a good player in Johnson, he can be a bit inconsistent. And I think Son, he's better on the left wing than striker, in my opinion. I think I prefer him on the left. I know Moore's more of a left winger, but he's played right in pre-season and done well. You can have Son and Moore as your left wing options, and then if you had like a Neto and a Brennan as your right wing options, it's a bit stronger. And then obviously this guy who's probably very young can then have time to adapt and be molded. Son needed a season or two to adapt. He was more, I wouldn't say a late bloomer, but it wasn't someone that was electrifying at 20 or 18 or 19. But I mean, it looks like a good deal from Tottenham, one for the future. I think with Tottenham, how Sarr and Udogi's worked out, buying them young, loan them out for you, then they come back in. You can't fault them for doing that again. If it's worked for them in the past, they should do it again. I just think they definitely need to get at least one experienced player in attack, whether it's Toney, whether it's Neto, whether it's a winger, whether it's a striker. I just think they need that one extra experienced name to boost them into next season.
Yeah, and one of my penultimate questions is about Tottenham's defence, actually, because even though people question our defence and the fact we do concede a lot of goals, we have built a defence for the future, considering that at one stage, a couple of years back, we had Lange and Eric Dyer. The oldest players in that back line are now Romero at 26, Poor at 24. You've got Udogi's around 21, Mickey van der Ven's 23. Dragason's 22, and you even got Luka Vuskovic, who's been on loan since he was 16. I think he joins next summer when he turns 18. Has been a phenomenon for the club he's at the moment. So do you look at that area of the pitch and think Tottenham are quite prepped, or do you still worry for Spurs' defence because, it can leak goals?
The thing is that I think in general your back four, if they stay fit, Udogi, Porro, Van der Ven, Romero, absolutely solid. Like that is one of the best back fours in the league. Yeah, it conceded a lot of goals, but that was more through the midfield just being played through and the defence being exposed. Like, I think I look at your strongest 11 and I think your back five, Vicario, including the back four, that is solid. That is a very good back four that can win you a trophy. That is probably the strongest part of Spurs, I think, is your defensive line. I think the question has been depth, but I think because you've got such a strong line, then Dragusin barely even played, and he's quite a good young player. Spencer's looked good in pre-season, whether he'll stay or not. Archie Gray can play right back. I think Ben Davies, actually, when he played for Tottenham last year, I thought he was all right, actually. I thought that, Ben Davies is one I think a lot of people would sell, but he's been fine. He does the job. So I'd say for the most part, like, the one area Tottenham probably sorted is the back. If you needed someone to help at the back, maybe someone that could, like a Calafiori type player that could play left back and left centre back to give cover there. But I think in terms of your starting 11, you're sort of for the back, I think.
Yeah, I think Calafiori, I've seen a lot of fans annoyed that he has gone to Arsenal over us. But does he start? He could maybe start left back, but, Udogi's been coming on leaps and bounds. I think he would have been the bench option. And if Arsenal can offer him first 2 minutes at left back, then it's hard to really argue and beat that. But my final question, Alice, really is, a lot of fans, some are not sure about Project Youth. They're calling it Project Youth. Obviously, they want that blend of top talent to come in as well. So what do you make of fans arguing that they're not so happy with just us signing younger players and maybe worried about if academy players could come true? But at the same time, Ange Postecoglou does have a good track record of improving young players. So would you say that is the argument you'd give when, fighting this corner?
There's an argument, I think, both ways, because with youth, it's very unpredictable. It's like, if Project Youth comes off and you get your own version of the class of 92 and you wait for it, it's fantastic. But if, again, Project Youth is, I don't think all these 17, 18, 19-year-olds could be thrown in right now and all perform. You never know. You get your Kobe Maino type players, and I think an Archie Gray could be thrown in the deep end and perform. Burville could do it. I think Mikey Moore could come off the bench and really make some impact. And you never know, like a Lange could actually really step up and become like a Harry Kane and kind of surprise you. And then Donnelly, Devine, Hall, you've got some really good players. You've got some really talented players, and they've looked good in pre-season. But, and then Phillips as well, he was the one that had a good loan spell. There's some really good players there, but you just don't know, like, sometimes throwing in the deep end if they're good enough or not. So it is a risk. And it's like, I think there's a good three in Moore, Burville and Gray, which I think ceiling wise and potential wise are probably a level above everyone else. But I think youth can be so unpredictable, because this, as I say, I always compare to United. Time and time again at United, we always think, why is he not playing this player? Why is he not playing that player? Then you throw them in a Premier League game and you're like, actually, you know what? They're not quite ready. Or you get a Kobe Maino or a Garnacho and they get thrown in, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to see Anthony start over Garnacho again. I don't want to see Ericsson or McTominay start over Maino again, like they're ready. So it's so difficult to predict. But I think right now you could play some risks more with midfield and defence. But I generally think an attack more will be a really good option coming off the bench. But I generally think if you can get a Tony or someone over the line, I think just do it, because you lost out on Harry Kane, and Lange could be special. He could be. But it's such a risk, you don't know. That I think right now, if you want to get top four next season and get in the Champions League, get an Ivan Toney and a Lancashire can learn from that if he steps up, I think.
No, that's a good idea, because I say Tony over Solanke, because even though he's 2 years older or whatnot, he's still good for the next 2 years. He's still going to be good for the next 3 or 4 years. And as you say, I think young strikers can learn a lot from proven strikers. You just see from how Tony was impactful in the Euros, how good he could be. And in a more creative side like Spurs compared to Brentford, I think he would be able to hit the numbers. Like, it was our second most highest scoring Premier League season last year. And if we maybe had Tony on the end of the chances instead of Timo Werner, I think we would have scored a whole lot more. But yeah, that's all we got time for today on the Sunday Talk Spurs YouTube channel. I want to say a massive thank you to Alice. Do you want to plug anything on your many channels where you're just, going through content like there's no tomorrow?
Thanks for having me on, Sonny. Guys, make sure you subscribe to his channel and hit the like on the video. And if you want to see my Spurs content, I do it over on my second channel. It's called Aquila Football. It's just Alice spelled backwards if you're struggling to search that up. And yeah, I'll talk about Tottenham and their matches. And if you do any chance of business, I'll give you my thoughts on it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Alice is probably the best, I would say, non-Spurs fan on YouTube, and especially got a compliment from my dad the other day. He said that you were speaking a lot of good sense about Spurs. So, you know, a compliment from my dad is really good because he doesn't give them to my channel. No, I'm joking. But anyway, I'd like to say a massive thank you again to Alice. If you have enjoyed, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.